Welcome back, everyone. We had a productive morning session, and I am expecting more of the same for this afternoon as we begin to work through the reg text. Jeff, I would like to give you the floor and turn it over to you. I would just ask that as you begin your walkthrough, will you prompt me when you are ready to take a pause and to solicit questions and comments from the group?
I most certainly will. Okay, everyone. We're going to put the initial draft regulations for discussion up on the screen. As some of you probably saw, rather than do this as we would normally publish it in the Federal Register, we did this as a red line markup to the existing regulations. And so the new text is in red, the deleted text is struck out. And the sections that are not being deleted are symbolized by 5 asterisks. So I'll give you time if you want to read along to pull that up. Otherwise, you can look at the screen. It looks readable. My eyesight's not 20/20, but I only have my reading glasses on, so I'm going to go from that. And I will preface this, which I didn't talk about in my presentation, but before we got started with this, we did have a lot of interagency discussion to identify federal equities elsewhere in the government. So we've met with the Veterans Administration, we met with HHS, we met with Federal Trade Commission, Department of Justice, and David, am I missing any on that? Small Business Administration, right? Yes. Okay. So we covered as many bases as we could. Anybody that we thought had an interest, and so that's reflected here. Obviously, the executive order is reflected here. Suggestions from NASIKI and the committee, the subcommittee on regs are reflected here, as well as sort of some of our own suggestions on how to streamline this. So it's a combination. There were many cooks in this kitchen, and I will, with that, hopefully everybody's here, and we will start. So we're going to start with Part 600. We do have really just one area of change in Part 600, which are the eligibility regulations, and that starts in 600.11. And what we're doing here is we are making changes to correspond to existing department policy guidance, which is reflected in Dear Colleague Letter GEN 2503, changes to the approval process for changing accrediting agencies. So there's a couple of deletions on page 1. Then there's an additional text, and these will generally track with the discussion in the Dear Colleague Letter. And I'll give you all a chance to take a look at that, and then we can have some questions and discussion on those changes. Jennifer, can we start with Jennifer Bloom?
We can. Jennifer, please.
Hi. I have 2 questions. The first is you strike and receives approval in A1, which to me implies that you're just requiring. I mean, when I first read the strike, I'm like, oh, they're just going to require a submission, and it's sort of presumed that they're changing accreditors. But then you have throughout the red, the secretary determining something. And so to me, that seems like the secretary is determining something. So
Yeah.
to me, that is a review.
So and Beth can correct me if I am wrong on this, but the logic here is turning the expectation or the assumption in the regulation from you have to prove why your going to make the change to basically assuming that the change is okay.
I understand that,
Yeah.
and I'm not actually, I mean, I think that I can get with that flow. But it still seems like the secretary will have to do something. And so to me, maybe it's not receives approval, but unless the secretary determines otherwise, what I guess I'm saying is if an institution submits a bunch of documents to the department saying that it's changing, is it automatically, I'm just thinking about process and timeframes, is it presumed that they are switching, or are you saying, and I know I'm not suggesting necessarily you have a time frame, but it does feel like you still want and I would support the department still going through a process. So
I'll let Jake talk to this one.
Yeah, I think what we're most talking about is the construction of the sentence here, right? So I think that's covered by the unless the secretary determines that addition in Romanet 2. So it becomes essentially a rebuttable presumption that essentially an institution is allowed to change unless the secretary determines that it's being done for one of these reasons set forth herein. We want to allow changes. We want to encourage, institutions to make the changes that they need to make. So by taking just changing the sentence a little bit, we think that this covers that. So the secretary does still have a role in the process, but that role is just to make sure that the change is not for one of these purposes, rather than, that the change was to basically to approve the change. So, yeah.
So I would suggest, because other bodies, particularly in the triad, still need to know something about timing. So I'm not suggesting, again, that you put in a time frame, but this is very open-ended in terms of, well, how long is the department taking? So I just feel like if we're looking for, and I think this is an issue that does come up in terms of clarity of who's approving what first among the triad. So I do think this needs more clarity. I have a quick second question. The question is, and there's a lot throughout, and you'll hear me say this sort of continually, there's a lot of double negatives in the drafting, which I always have issue with. But there's a couple places in this section where it says, and it's sub-Romanet 3, secretary will not determine the cause of changing its accrediting agency to be unreasonable. So it's sort of a double negative there. And I'm not following. Are you saying that if there's a withdrawal, revocation, termination, you still might let them change agencies? Like, I wasn't following what was meant there, partly because of the drafting, I think.
So he currently allows that in certain instances. Like for example, where the change is on a disagreement, for example, on law. Right, so it's a violation. It's what we've talked about in some of our discussions, that there's a conflict between what state law requires and what the standard is, and what the institution wants. And so, rather than an institution be forced into complying with the standard, which they believe violates state law, this would give them the ability to move to another accreditor, and that type of instance I think would be allowable. But generally speaking, our intent here is, if someone is, again, in the crosshairs of an agency and they're pursuing an action, that we would not allow a change there, because it's basically a circumvention of the process.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jennifer. Michael, I'm going to give you the floor.
I'm going to go right to Jennifer's last point on that, because I'm not sure that I read it exactly the same way. I think the prohibition now is not as wide, maybe, as there is that the secretary will not determine such cause, and it goes on and lists things like has had its accreditation withdrawn within the last 24 months or been subject to probation. And even notwithstanding those things, the only reason why those wouldn't apply is if there was an adverse action was a result of the agency's failure to respect the institution's stated mission, including religious mission. And that may be what you're referring to in terms of, they applied their standards and appropriately. But I wonder then in trying to achieve the language that you're looking for here and on page 2, starting at the capital A, and B, avoid or delay enforcement or oversight by the department or an accrediting agency. And I wonder if it might not be more useful there, or to say something like, if the institution is seeking the change in order to avoid noncompliance or a finding of noncompliance or something a little more than just delaying enforcement, because you're under Romanet 3 are really opening it up to the prospect of some, we've been talking about race to the bottom. And I think that is something to be mindful of. And I think people around this table are sensitive to it. And so just wanting to make sure that we've dotted our Romanets and all that. It might be useful to, if the department's open to maybe some language there that would, to Jennifer's point, I'm not going to speak to the double negatives. I'm going to cede that territory to you, Jennifer. But I think there's maybe a way to say that really helps to firm up the idea that if you're in trouble at one accreditor, you should not get a kind of an I'm not saying that you're suggesting an automatic, but it should be a rougher road to cover than just we want to leave now and seek another creditor. So if you're open to some potentiality there, I'd like to send something over.
Yeah, and again, you got to look at where we started. So like the default, status quo regulation that's in there is very strict. It's a sort of a mother may I type of requirement in there, and so we were looking to undo that part and still provide the protections on. There are some instances where you want to keep the accreditor with their current accreditor and not allow them to switch.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff. Mark, you have the floor.
Yeah, so this is just clarification on the points made. So I'm president of an institution. I've sent you a letter. I'm saying I'm going to do this. I've done the things that I have to do in Roman numerals 1 and 2. Are you going to at some point send me a letter, say thank you very much? Or am I going to go start moving ahead and 6 months later get a letter from you say cease and desist?
Yeah,
That's I think is the question that Jennifer's asking. And then secondarily, on Roman numeral 3, this is talking about things that will not determine calls. Well, the universe of things that will not determine calls is infinite. Why would you even bother to have Roman numeral 3 just to specify a few of the things that may not have calls? So 2 questions. Thank you.
Go ahead, Jake.
I'll respond to 2. I'll let Jeff speak to 1. To the extent that any of you have suggestions for drafting, be they grammatical, clarifying, or otherwise, feel free to send them to us. We are happy to look at them and, incorporate, reasonable changes that make these regs easier to understand and, easier to follow for everybody involved. That's part of this exercise. And we appreciate having everyone at the table raise these points.
Thank you, Jake. Jeff, please.
And we'll go back and take another look at Romanet 3. So we'll come back tomorrow on that one.
Thank you, Mark. Mag, did you have follow-up? Turn your microphone on, please, and repeat that. Thank you.
Will the institution that has sent notice to the department that they are seeking to change their accreditors receive acknowledgement of such process?
I think we can fix that with a notification requirement. The question is whether Jake will let the secretary be regulated in this instance. So let us take a look at that. But I think that can be solved with a notification requirement built into the process somewhere, either regulatory or sub-regulatory.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Mark. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah, so when you're vetting an accreditor, let me try to reword my question here. How is the department going to determine that an institution isn't trying to switch for one of the reasons that you've outlined? And again, to the points of others at the table, it may be worth taking that Romanet out.
Well, again, the default now is that you have to ask permission to leave. So I guess my question back to you is, why should we allow that to continue? And why isn't this a better approach?
I'll think about that. Thank you.
Yeah. When Claire,
Thank you, Magnus.
When Claire gives you the answer, let me know. Okay.
Jeff, I'm going to turn it back over to you. We've worked our way through all of the comments and questions at this time.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you, everybody. We will now go down to getting there. Part 602. And we will start with a very controversial change on 602.2 in paragraph A, changing website 2 words to website 1 word. And that's actually just for consistency because it's used in other places as 1 word. I think that just got, we're here, we're fixing it, so I might as well do it. And then we go down to B, and this is really just changing notifications in the Federal Register and pushing some of the announcements of actions to the department's website, which we think is more user friendly than specifically publishing everything in the Federal Register. Okay.
Did you want to take questions on 602?
Yeah, if we can pause there if there's a question on that change.
Jennifer, please.
Hey, actually, it's funny because Mark just whispered over to me the same thing I was going to say. Sorry, I think we at least the 2 of us, had questions about multiple accreditation. So that was back in 600.
Oh, okay, we can go back.
So mine's really straightforward. And I'm hoping that for the same reasons as the other conversation, it's a little bit of the same issue. I'm really supportive of multiple accreditations. There are lots of reasons why institutions should have multiple accreditations. It's not just, I think I read somebody who's concerned about, having the flexibility of one ends that they have another one. But there are reasons to have multiple accreditation. And so I support the concept, but again, I have the same issue with the same sort of language about because I do think that if one agency puts an institution on withdrawal, then the other institution the other accreditor should really care about that. And so I think that the language in here is not really clear on that piece. So it's not really a question. It's more of hey, I would love to think about that more, and along the lines of Michael, maybe it's in the same context, provide language.
Sorry, that's a good point. Again, the intent here is to facilitate the switching of agencies, so it's sort of a conforming change in many ways. But you're right, there are other situations where multiple accreditations there. And Jake, if you want to add any color, feel free.
Please, Jake.
I actually just have a question. Jennifer, what are you looking for there specifically? A notification requirement between the accreditors, or what precisely?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think it's not just a notification, because I do think the other accreditor would need to be taking action, and I think the department would want them to be taking action. And I don't think we want to wait for like NASIKI or the recognition process or anything like that. And so I'm not 100% sure, but I'm just giving you a sense, and I certainly can work on language, whether it's that the department steps in on the multiple accreditation piece, or whether it's a requirement that they work, that the other accreditor is required to do something. And Beth's about to help me out anyway.
Beth, please go ahead.
To your point, Jennifer, in 602.27, we already have requirements that agencies have to notify of those types of actions. So them contacting the department would actually be an additional step. So an agency who takes such an action already has to provide that notification. And if an institution or program were to seek accreditation, there's they have to disclose it, and they would be precluded from granting accreditation if some of these other like those types of actions were in play.
Thank you,
Then maybe
Beth.
there could be a cross-reference somewhere in this section to that scenario.
I would defer to my OGC colleague about making those types of things and not making it too laborious, but yes.
Thank you, Beth. I'm going to move on in cards. Magnus, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Kayla. Could you explain what substantial compliance means? It's kind of a murky area for me.
I'm going to call a friend on that one.
We have a definition of substantial compliance. It's used for agencies though. So it's in 602.3.
Yeah,
I have to
that's right.
scroll down for it to read it exactly.
We're getting there.
It's on page 14.
Yeah. So I can read it if you'd like. Substantial compliance means the agency demonstrated to the department that it has the necessary policies, practices, and standards in place and generally adheres with fidelity to those policies, practices, and standards, or the agency has policies, practices, and standards in place that need minor modifications to reflect its generally compliant practice.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
And that's a current definition, not a new one in here.
Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Beth and Jeff. Michael, I'm moving over to you.
I've heard this several times, and so I'm going to ask for a primer on this. And Jeff, you just said it, that the secretary prefers not to, does not regulate itself, or something along those lines. Can you help me understand then, when you're using phrases like the secretary will or will not consider, is that not, is that a double negative? Isn't that them saying what future secretaries will or will not do as well? And why would we want to say, without having some area for a secretary to make some kind of qualitative decisions, because these are really high stakes issues? And so why would we want to say in all instances, the secretary is going to consider this or not consider these kinds of things? And so help me understand what you're looking for in terms of kind of the expectations around when and when not the secretary chooses to regulate through regulation.
So basically what this is it's a change in assumption of the general rule, right? So the general rule is that unless there's some reason to keep you in, you can switch. And so you're right in that in both cases, the secretary is regulated because you're putting it in, but it is a process. When I talk about sort of regulating the secretary, part of it is like where we give tasks and timelines and things like that. That generally gets kicked out by OGC when we draft something like that, because of this notion that we don't regulate the secretary in our regulations. We say the secretary determines and sort of leave it at that, you know.
Jake, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's a exercise in striking the balance, right? We don't want to restrict the secretary's authority in some of these cases, but we also need to provide surety to, institutions, accreditors, and the public as to what the secretary considers and how these decisions are made. So in some cases, we are willing to, put these things in the regs and be very clear about how this works. Whereas in other cases, stuff, especially where we get into the minutia of timelines or what applications look like, often is better done through guidance because those things need to be more responsive to, agency needs, the needs of all the parties involved. So, and like I said, it's a balancing act. You put some of it in regs, you put some of it in guidance, but at the end of the day, we don't want to overly constrain the department or, create a problem or the appearance that, decisions are being made in a way that's not transparent or, arbitrary in any way. We want that to have a very clear framework.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jake. Michael, back to you.
So on that point, then on page 4, number 3, here we've said, if I'm reading this correctly, that the secretary will not determine. the cause of having multiple agencies to be unreasonable due to withdrawal, revocation, other termination of accreditation, show cause order, or suspension. That one seems rather definitive. And there may be very good cause to not allow for multiple accrediting agencies due to one of these reasons. And I understand why maybe having it slightly more subjective or gray about changing accreditors. But I wonder why this one, there's comfort around this, because what this will lead to potentially is, well, I have multiple accreditors and then I'll just quickly be able to make the change, even though I've not demonstrated compliance with one of those accreditors. And I also understand that this may be, well, it might be the difference between an institutional programmatic or I'm kind of moving the process along. I wonder if it's not more prudent to keep this one also, the secretary, may consider and turning it differently. That may consider that the cause of having multiple accreditations is not reasonable cause for having multiple accreditations.
Jeff, did you want to speak to that?
No, I understand Mike's point. As I said at the outset, lots of cooks in the kitchen on this one. So we'll take that one back.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, I'm going to give you the floor.
Yeah, I've been listening, and I think that in consideration of what we're saying about the secretary, I'm not even sure the secretary needs to be like mentioned in this sentence and also in the one above where the same sort of language is referenced in terms of changing accreditors. And I think I heard you loud and clear on you're flipping the presumption. So you're presumed. I think this is the one place where you might be hearing some of us say, yeah, no. So maybe these section, like maybe there could be a statement just simply saying somewhere, somehow, with our drafting, withdrawal, revocation, other are presumed to be reasonable reasons for denial or whatever the frame is, unless, and that allows for that flexibility, Jake, that you were talking about for the secretary. So I'm not saying there shouldn't be an unless clause, but unless the secretary determines, something or something along those lines.
Okay, we'll take that back and consider it.
Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer. Raymond, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I just want to make sure I put on the record, I think it is important to flip the presumption. That has been the experience in the state of Florida. In the 2022 legislative session, our legislature passed a statute requiring our institutions, as they came up for reaccreditation, to change accreditors. We did this because in the first Trump administration, we went through negotiated rulemaking. I say we because talking about higher ed writ large, and removed the regional monopolies. We created free agency, the ability to move. That occurred, that negotiated rulemaking, towards the end of the Trump administration. 22 in spring, we passed in the Florida, the legislature passed the statute requiring us to change. In November, there's an election, new president, new administration here in the Department of Education, and we get notified before we can leave, we have to go through a pre-clearance process. Now, pre-clearance wasn't anywhere in the negotiated rulemaking. It was created out of whole cloth in a new administration. So in December of 22, our first institution, which was coming up for renewal, University of Central Florida, submitted their request for pre-clearance to leave SACS and to go to HLC. And they received silence as their original answer. And when they pinged them again, they got a request for information. Now, the information was already in the application that was provided, but they answered it all. Then we got more silence. Then when we pinged them again, we got another request for more information, which was already in both the first and second answers. But UCF gave them the answers. And finally, a process that began in December of 2022 was resolved in January of 2024 when the education department finally said, you have pre-clearance to move. something that we anticipated we would have at the end of negotiated rulemaking in 2020. Anything we can do to flip the presumption, I think is important for the universities and the institutions. And so what I don't want us to lose sight of as we're going through this is why it's important that that presumption be flipped. Because if you're going to have competition, then you've got to have a means where the universities know what the process is, and they don't have to worry about obstacles being created out of whole cloth to delay, deny, or obstruct them as they try to follow the rules. That's all I'd add.
Thank you, Raymond. Jeff, please.
We greatly appreciate you putting that on the record because it's very relevant to this change.
Thank you. Mike, you have the floor.
I just wanted to ask a point of clarification on page 4, subbullet 4, otherwise undermine the integrity of the Title IV HEA programs, what the intent of that was. I mean, I guess I could imagine a scenario where a future secretary might say changing accreditors undermines the integrity of programs, which would create some sort. I guess my question is just kind of what's the scope of what's envisioned under that exception? It also applies to the first point on changing accreditors.
To be honest, and remembering some of the discussions on that, I think that was designed to be a catch-all for all other bad stuff from the that were put on there. But yeah, I think that's we were trying to capture the again, as I've said a couple times here, the situations where if they were in the process of an action being taken, not being able to evade it as a general matter.
Please, Jake, would you like to add to that?
Remember where we were just talking about we don't want to regulate the secretary? This is kind of where that comes in. It allows a little bit of deference if we see something, untoward happening to step in and block. It's, doesn't change the presumption that, people will be able to switch, but it does give the secretary some degree of ability to step in. To your point, because this is designed to create a presumption that accreditors or institutions can switch accreditors, I think would be very hard pressed for a future secretary to come in and say that any switching of accreditors is a way to undermine the HEA. That being said, I think it does preserve some necessary flexibility for the department.
Thank you, Jeff, Jake, and Mike for the question. Michael, I'm going to go to you.
Thank you. Just two clarifications. One, am I correct that there is a waiting period for an institution that loses its accreditation as an adverse action to regain its eligibility, for a 2-year waiting period to regain your eligibility to participate in federal financial aid?
Beth, you want to speak to that?
Yes, and I believe that's in statute.
All right, yeah. Okay, thank you. My second is so part of what you're striking is on page 5. And that is number 3, designates to the secretary which agency's accreditation or pre-accreditation institution uses to establish the eligibility under this part. And so I'm wondering, are you no longer going to require the institution to designate? Because I don't see it in the new language under multiple accreditation. So how would the secretary determine if you're not asking them to designate, or are you just going to allow multiple designations? You have to read the stricken stuff too.
Who would like to respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, we're still chatting about it, but I believe, and what we're going to confirm this, that the reason why we had to strike that is because you didn't want to have them lose in both instances, right? When there was a change, and they had multiple. I think that's dealing with the multiple accreditor scenario.
Yeah, right. So regardless, doesn't an institution need to designate one way or the other? So what
for the interpreters? Yes, was the answer.
I'm sorry. And so I guess I'm not understanding why we would want to to remove that as a stated expectation, unless there's some expectation that an institution is going to be able to move fluidly between its multiple accreditations with regard to which agency it wants to use for the purposes of establishing eligibility to participate in Title IV.
Yeah, we'll take that back, but it's not our intent to have institutions have two for an extended period of time and
So you're just
and
talking
move
like
back and forth.
like an overlap period.
Yeah, this is specifically designed for an overlap.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thanks. Just to go back to Mike's question about sub-Romanet 4 in both sections on the otherwise undermine the integrity. I would assume, or again, maybe it's a hypothetical, I just wanted to throw out there. Let's say said institution is on HCM 1 or HCM 2. Would that be an example perhaps where I'm not saying you should answer, like, I'm just saying this is an example of the integrity of Title IV situation?
I guess depending on the reason why that it was on, heightened cash monitoring.
Sometimes it can be trivial. Right.
Because, if it's just a trigger because of some type of a recent transaction or something like that, or, some of these new accounting rules where they change their leases and it puts them in a bad situation. I don't think we would want to invoke it in that situation, but if it was more punitive and is your card up?
Please, Beth. Did you want to respond to this as well? I'll give you the floor. I just want to make sure we don't have multiple people speaking at once for the recording and the transcript. Beth, I saw your card go up. Did you want to respond before I turn it back over to Jennifer?
To Mike, what Michael had brought up, but
I'll circle back to you. Jennifer, please.
So I was just going to say, this might be a really good example of preamble language to give like these such as examples so that we're not.
Yeah, no, definitely.
It goes to the point of wanting clarity.
Right. No, yeah. We can only get to a certain level of clarity, in this. And then that's why we have the preamble, right, is where we can get into a little bit more in the various scenarios.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeff. Beth, I am going to go to you now.
I just wanted to Michael's point, it is in the statute. I wanted to give that citation. It's in 496, HA 496, but 20 USC 1099B, Section I, the dual accreditation rule, in that at the end of that, you are required, if the institution is accredited as an institution by more than one accrediting agency, the institution shall designate which agency's accreditation shall be utilized in determining the institution's eligibility for programs under the Act.
Thank you, Beth. Michael, did you have a brief response to that?
Brief. So I just think one of the things to be mindful of in terms of protecting this is that you don't lose your eligibility, or when you lose your accreditation, losing your eligibility, that you're able to designate quickly and not having to still undergo the 2-year waiting period to regain your eligibility. And I just wonder, I put that out there so that you're mindful of that. To me, is undermining the integrity of the Title IV program and what the 2-year prohibition and waiting period is meant to do. A placeholder.
Okay. Thanks for flagging the potential loophole.
Thank you. Magnus, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you. I just have a quick clarification question. I'm actually looking at page 2, A and B. So A reads evade or circumvent a requirement of federal law or regulation, and B reads avoid or delay enforcement or oversight by the department or accrediting agency. I'm wondering what the difference is between these two. Are you trying to go after two different things? Because it seems like B is covered in A. So I just wanted to ask about that. It's top of page 2.
Yeah, I believe that language is directly out of the dear colleague letter that we issued earlier. I don't have it in front of me, but that's my recollection on it.
Magnus, do you have follow-up?
Yeah, so just again to clarify, are they are they tackling two different things, or are they tackling the same thing? Could that be for the sake of reducing the length of the regulations?
So A is avoiding a requirement outright, and B is the next step is avoiding or delaying the enforcement, which may not be a particular requirement. It may be some action that the institution had tripped at the department or the agencies going after them for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. Beth, did you have something additional? No problem. We've worked our way through the comments and questions for now. Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you so you can let us know where you'd like us to direct our attention next.
Okay, so we'll go back to 602 in the definitions. And I'll give AD the chance to find the typo in since he said that's his forte on this. No, actually, section 4 should not be a strike. It looks like that was an extra character that got introduced somewhere in the process. So in this case, we are deleting the reference to institution of higher education in part 600, which for those of you who are real HEA geeks, refers to only institutions that are private, nonprofit, or publics. We are striking the reference there. And then we are adding in a definition of institution in the definitions for part 602, which is a encompassing definition that includes all of the basically it parallels the eligible institution in 600.2, which is the Title IV definition of institution. So it's both a conforming change, and it's really a potential error in the existing regulations where they limited the term too much, and so we're correcting that. And then we have a couple little small ones here. On page 8, paragraph B, the term additional, that's just conforming the deletion of educational to just institution. That's another conforming to keep consistent this term institution throughout. And then we made, you'll see later on, all the references to institution of higher education are now institution. Or institutions in a couple of instances. Okay, if everybody's okay with that one, skipping down to page 12, we are adding a new definition of a term that's used extensively in part 602 of what a related, associated, or affiliated trade association means. And I'll give you all a chance to take a look at that and ask any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. Michael, I'll have you get us started, please.
Is the term line of commerce a term of art? Is it otherwise defined? I don't have a recollection of it being defined anywhere else. Do you have a definition in your pocket that you could share with us? Is it?
Yeah, this is not, I don't believe it defined in our regs. It is defined within federal law broadly. There is case law on the definition of line of commerce. It relates to Commerce Clause litigation. So it's a very long-standing and settled definition, but I don't believe it's used in our regs as it currently stands.
Follow up, Michael?
Do you have a synoptic description of what that is?
Let me get back to you on that one. As with anything with case law, it's not always easy to sum up perfectly cleanly. So I want to make sure I get it correct for you.
Are you really married to that language? Is there a little?
We can take that back, but we like it because it mirrors case law. So
Thank you all. I'm going over to Jennifer and then to Siri.
So I had the same question as Michael. I did a little legal research on the term lines of commerce because that's what I do for fun. And I do also know that the Federal Election Commission includes it, which I think is sort of odd. I didn't spend a lot of time focusing on its definition because I didn't like it. But I do have a suggested change. It sounds like you're pretty married, but in case you want to separate, here's some language. Is organized to promote a specific line of commerce, business, industry, or profession.
Thank you, Jennifer. Any response from the department?
We'll take that one back, discuss it with some of the other council that worked on this.
And if you can, please send that to us in an email just so we have record of it. It gets included with the other proposals and we don't lose it in the shuffle.
Okay.
And ensure that's a PDF named properly. Thank you. Siri, please.
I'm also a business professor, so we see this as well. And I'll just, for the record, put Section 7 of the Clayton Act, which prohibits acquisitions where the effect in any line of commerce ... may be substantially to lessen competition. So it's essentially the product dimension of a market definition.
Thank you, Siri. Jennifer?
I want to realize I should say something about my opinion on this. It's not that I don't like the comment of lines of commerce. It's just that it's in the world of specialized and programmatic accreditation, I find it to be overly narrow. And we often talk about professions and careers. And so I just don't think it covers that base. It's just historical. And so it's not that it's not the term by it. It's just that it's by itself.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jeff, I'm going to turn it back over to you to continue moving us through the text.
Okay. So we will go to page 13 under representative of the public on page 13. We are essentially just switching the term and to be consistent with the new definition of related to, associated with, affiliated with, and making a conforming change there. So it's just a moving of the word. And if there are no questions on that, we can jump to page 15, which I assume there are going to be a lot of questions on. And that is on 602.10, link to federal programs, otherwise known as the federal link. Sorry. So taken together, these changes are designed to strengthen the federal link requirements, particularly for programmatic and specialized accreditors. It's our belief that in a number of instances, even with currently or accreditors that have recently sought accreditation, that link is, or the description of that link is not as strong as what the statute requires, where there's it could be a non-Department of Education program where there's no active stream of funding, for example, and hasn't been for a number of years, or they're just thinking about it. And Beth, I know you've had some different examples over the years. Maybe you can provide some additional color on some of the things that we've seen in the past.
Yes, this is the changes here were to address those agencies who have recognition but are not actively, there's no institution or program that they accredit that are actively participating in any other funding either funding or other programs at the federal level. So Title IV is the one that most people are familiar with for institutional, but what we're talking about is more the purely programmatic that are looking to potentially have members participate in like I said, federal programs. What we found and seen over the years is that many of those federal programs have changed their requirements, that they don't necessarily require the accreditation by a specialized accrediting agency, but actually just require accreditation by an agency recognized by the secretary. So obviously that would broaden it beyond a specific profession. So this is kind of to address that there isn't the link that is required, and it's actually in statute. I could give you that. It's 20 USC 1099B section M, which is the limitation on authority, is that the secretary is limited to only recognizing agencies that have some sort of federal link.
Thank you, Beth. Anything else to tee this up before I move to questions and comments?
Yeah, the only other part of the rationale that I would sort of add to is there are, obviously some of these agencies where there isn't what's intended, the link that's intended by the HEA, it puts significant strain on our staff resources and on the time and attention that NASIKI has in reviewing other agencies where there was either a Title IV link or a more robust federal link.
Thank you, Jeff. Rebecca, will you get us started?
Yes. So as you pointed out, Jeff, this really does disproportionately affect the programmatics. And on behalf of our constituents, I'm just curious if you would consider a proposal for like a risk-based review that outlines how much federal aid was previously taken in, how much is anticipated. So, I understand, Beth, that this, we don't want to add to the list of things you have to consider, but I think there are several programmatics that will be impacted by this. And then we tie in your 2-year provision potentially or some other time frame. But, our constituency has asked that at least we put this potential proposal forward.
Response. Thank you, Rebecca, from the department.
Rebecca, I'll always look at a proposal. Just please give us the rationale and particularly the legal rationale where you think it, because that's really where we're focused on, is that we think that where there's an intention or where there's a past link, but it's, expired years ago, we don't think that's consistent with the statute. So if you can help us get there within that constraint, we will definitely take a look at it.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Rebecca. Michael, you have the floor.
So if I read this correctly, then when an agency that's seeking initial recognition, they send their application in, they'll say, we believe we either will have it, we have a program that's waiting for a recognition, or we'll have it within 2 years. If they don't have it within that 2-year period of time, then it's an automatic, the agency ceases to be recognized by the department. Am I reading that correctly?
I think, yeah, on that, what we're really looking for is like, okay, if you're going to get it in 2 years, come back and see us in 2 years. I mean, are you talking about an initial credit or initial?
Yes, under small c on page 16.
Okay, let me get there.
If the agency is seeking initial recognition, it must demonstrate that an institution or program is likely to rely on the agency's accreditation to establish the link within 2 years. And then further down, if after 2 years, after we said, okay, you don't have it today, you may not even have it tomorrow, but you need to have it within 2 years, then there's some additional measure that's done then, And then I guess what I'm really trying to get to is the agency ceases to be recognized. Is there any due process that's involved there, or is it a straight, we asked for it, you don't have it, you now, as of this date, are no longer a recognized agency? And to the question of, and I think maybe Mark brought this up earlier, the reliability of what institutions can rely upon and think about. Is there any process that's going to occur there that would give an agency the opportunity to provide some of that color that Rebecca's talking about?
Excuse me. I'll defer to Jake with regard to the due process piece of this, and whether he thinks it's right. But generally, I think your understanding is correct in terms of following the logic there for new accreditors.
I would be careful using the word due process here. It creates a 2-year period. The due process is you have to provide something within those 2 years. And if you don't, you automatically cease to be accredited. So it's not a lack of due process. This is the process.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jacob. Jeffrey, I'm over to you.
Yeah, it's sort of what Michael and Rebecca were talking about, considering that it takes most institutions a number of years as they're either looking to enter the space. Some accreditors are going to require 2 years of financials in order to accredit them, or if we're switching accreditors, that can take anywhere between 3 to 5 years to do. But if I'm going to a new accreditor that that's being promoted and so forth, I can't make that switch as a school within that 2-year time frame. My potential new accreditor is gone. It doesn't exist any longer. So my question is, where the 2-year mark, is that somewhere in statute, or where is that number coming from, and can that be expanded?
Jeff?
I think that in terms of the 2 years, that's sort of a standard that we've used in the past in terms of giving institutions an opportunity to come into compliance. But don't forget, in this case, we're talking strictly about the federal link piece of it, not any other sort of requirement of initial accreditation.
Jeffrey, do you have follow-up before I move on?
No, thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, you have the floor.
So I just first wanted to, as it relates to the programmatic specialized section and just the link, I just want to speak from Nasiki experience. I welcome, it's might need to tweak some language, but I welcome this additional language, because we have often had programmatics come before us and there's no evident link. And it is really frustrating that they have not been able to establish, and they might say, oh, well, and it is a check, in fairness to them, it is a chicken and egg scenario where another agency, usually the Health and Human Services, has something that says, in order to be eligible for a grant, you need to be recognized by an agency in the field. And, honestly, I wish those agencies would also conform, and somebody needs to start this process. And so I appreciate the department, because it is frustrating to have agencies who come before Nasiki who literally don't know the last time that any of their institutions or programs, that's really usually programs, received any Title IV funds. So I appreciate that change. On the 2-year piece, I also support this. I'm wondering whether you might want to add in somewhere the concept of pre-accreditation as applicable, because some agencies have pre-accreditation, and that should, in my view, and this may get to some of Jeffrey's concerns, like that might actually help in the count within the 2 years, because it does take a while to get accreditation. And so adding in pre-accreditation or some process type piece might be helpful.
Thank you, Jennifer. Beth, do you want to respond?
I know we're not at that yet, the next part, but in 60212, we talk about, changes we've made to agencies becoming recognized. And part of that is still required is that they have to have accredited or pre-accredited somebody. So to the point that it's not as though the 2-year time period for a an institution or program were to start at recognition, but in fact, once they were to be accredited, and then once that agency were to gain recognition, they would have full 2 years going. There's not the point that they have to wait to get somebody in starting at recognition.
Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Jennifer. Rebecca, I'm back over to you. Please turn your mic on. There you go.
So I have a point here. Apparently, so the funder link, it has to be live and active, right? Yes. Because what I'm reading here is that the statute only says that it needs to be used. So, and apparently that was applied since.
To be used, I think to be used infers the present tense. It doesn't mean sometime way in the past. Get you in. So yeah, I mean, again, you have to read the statute as having meaning. And I think in this particular case, the requirement's there because it's an active requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Jeff. Magnus, I'm over to you, and then Mark.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to say broadly to the department, I think this section reflects an effort to reduce administrative burden in some areas. So I just wanted to express appreciation for that. And I think that's always a worthy goal.
Yeah, thank you. And, again, the time that we have to focus on, institutions where there are significant Title IV is probably better spent than when there isn't any federal funds at risk.
Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Jeff. Mark, you have the floor.
Okay, so this is back to the program accreditors and the link piece. So, and I just may not understand this, so if I don't, please forgive me. But, in my former life, I was a dean of a school of public health. We were accredited by the Commission or Council on Education and Public Health, CEPH. CEPH did not exist to give us access to Title IV funds because our institution had institutional accreditation. But certainly every dean and every school of public health goes through it because the NIH, the CDC, Health Services Research Administration all require them to be accredited. Are they failing to meet the link requirement by not having their accreditation tied to eligibility for Title IV funds? Because it's not required for them to have it, but it is for their institution.
Beth, please.
Sure. No. So institutional accrediting agencies, they have to have an institutional reason, and by and large, it's Title IV. For the programmatics, it is like what you talked about. It is a access to another federal program. The issue is that within our regulations and statute, it is the program or institution for access. So even though like the VA or other people or even OMB for hiring purposes say you have to have attended or have maybe a credential in a certain field that is accredited by a certain agency. Those are not federal links. The federal link has to be for the program. So it'd be more of like what you were talking about an NIH study or something at HHS through HRSA. Those are for like our healthcare related programs are mostly in those types of areas. We also have people who have links through DoD programs, through other programs. So, but that's what we're talking about. It's not the institutional Title IV, but it would be beyond that.
Thank you. Mark, any brief follow-up before I move on?
So this then go from my past to my present. So the Commission for Public Higher Education and nascent accreditor. So under looking at this again, I may be misunderstanding if the agency is seeking initial records, blah, blah. So the institutions that, some of the ones we're talking to just got their 10-year reaffirmations from an established accreditor. And they are seeking accreditation through us under the multiple accreditors, but they're not going to need to use ours for the next 2 years if they don't want to. Now they could give up their existing accreditation that they just went through. But are you saying that we have to basically look for at-risk institutions to meet this 2-year requirement?
Please, Beth.
No. So if you actually look up on 60210A, for your particular example, if pursuant to B, if the agency accredits one or more institutions that already participate in Title IV and that particular institution could designate the agency as their link, then you would satisfy the requirement. So that was actually put in the prior reg changes.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Beth. With that, we've moved through the current comments and questions. Jeff, I'm going to turn it back over to you to continue moving us through the text.
Okay, that should bring us to page 17, section 602.11, which will now be entitled Extent of Accrediting Activities as opposed to geographic area of accrediting activities. This change conforms 602.11 to our recently published interpretation in the Federal Register notice. To revise and clarify the prior interpretation of what was meant by department recognized accrediting agencies and to provide more specificity with regard to the use of the terms regional and national.
Any questions or comments over that section? I see none thus far, Jeff, so I turn it back over to you.
Yeah, and so I would just point. So for those of you reviewing, it may be helpful to pull that Federal Register notice to just so you can crosswalk in between the two.
Please, Jennifer.
I think I have a question. Isn't there a separate section, and maybe I'm wrong, on scope? Like, to me, this seems to like blend into the scope section.
Beth, please respond.
Yes, we have a definition of scope, but it does not include anything related to location of. That was actually removed in the prior regs. So if you go up to the definition in 602.3 of scope of recognition, but it no longer includes any geographic mention as being required to be included in the scope of recognition.
Thank you, Beth. Jennifer, do you have any follow-up before I move on? Okay. Jeff, back to you.
Okay. So that'll take us to page 19, 602.12 on accrediting experience. And this reflects, again, our recently published interpretation in the Federal Register, and this deals with the 2-year rule, if I'm mistaken, right? Oh, no, this is still back on geographical area. I'm sorry. And again, these are conforming changes. Okay, I just wanted not to get too far ahead of my skis. So yeah, so this is the removal of the specific 2-year rule for new accreditors. And just for a little bit of history, this is one where we went back and forth between the statute and the regs, and so there isn't a statutory requirement for the 2-year rule, and so that's why we removed it. The 2-year rule, for all intent and purposes, everybody's recollection seems to be that it was based on the definition for branch campus and the FSA definitions on institution, and people just say, hey, that's a convenient time frame and ported it over, but there isn't a statutory requirement in the accreditation regs.
Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, please.
Thanks. I think I'm going to have multiples, but I'll just start early, start up top. So I wanted to, there's a place where it mentions, the evaluation, it's bottom of 19. shall be considered under a reasonable evaluation of the totality of the circumstances in determining if the agency is a reliable authority. Shouldn't this just say like that they need to meet section 496? I mean, the criteria that's under law? Like, I mean, to be a new accreditor, don't they need to go through the recognition process and meet the criteria of section 496? I just didn't know what, I mean, honestly, I didn't know what the evaluation of the totality of the circumstances and determining if it's a reliable authority. I thought we determine reliable authority based on the recognition criteria. So couldn't we just cross-reference 496?
Please, Jake.
Yeah, actually, if you look at the Romanettes below, it references all of the regulatory sections in which 496 is implemented in terms of the additional criteria or the criteria, such as the accreditation standards, granting and denying accreditation and pre-accreditation, conducting site visits, etc. Granted, I realize those are slightly different than the explicit wording of 496 itself, but those are incorporated therein. And these also, I think, speak to the experience of acting as an accreditor, because we're specifically talking about here taking actions like that of an established accreditor. For example, conducting site visits.
Thank you, Jake. Follow up, Jennifer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with the list, although there might be more in the list that I would add, but I'm fine with the list. I was about to call it the preamble language, the precursor language, not pre, it's actually in the regs. Under a reasonable value. I mean, I just don't know, like, we're so solid, in my view, on the structure of the statute today as it relates to the recognition process that I would just say that it's met the recognition, undergone the recognition, unless you're thinking that there's a different process that's not the recognition process.
I think this comes down to if I'm not mistaken, Beth, we're talking about timing here and when the activities occur. And that gives a nascent accreditor some, the ability to start the process quicker, as opposed to having to have to go through all the gates before they're eligible.
Thank you, Jeff. Beth, please go ahead.
Yes, no, I'm just going to agree with what Jeff had said, is that this is to start talking about starting the process to be reviewed. You have to have done some of these things, versus the language that's being struck is that they have to have accredited or pre-accredited somebody. This is saying that you don't have to have done that prior to submitting an application to us, but instead have to have done one or more of these other activities.
Jennifer, if you have brief feedback for that piece, I'd welcome it. And then I'll put you back in the queue if you have other questions.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to think for a bit.
Sounds good. I appreciate that. Michael, you have the floor.
So along those lines, I understand the timing bit, but I wonder if it might not be reasonable to say that for the purpose, and this is on page 20, for the purpose of demonstrating experience, because I think to the point that you're making is so that you're not waiting to grant accreditation as the eligibility criteria. But for the purposes of demonstrating experience under this part, should we not at least require there Romanet 1 adopting accreditation standards, Romanet 4 adopting operating procedures, Romanet 5 establishing a process to accept applications, and then require at least those three things, and may include additionally other things, like maybe they have granted accreditation, maybe they have conducted site visits, and maybe they do have other evidence. But I would think as a baseline criteria, you would want at least standards, processes, and procedures.
Thank you, Michael. Any response from the department before I move on cards?
Makes sense to me, Mike. We'll take that back and look and see if there's anything that we're not seeing in there. But again, intent here is not to have to jump through all the hoops first before you can even submit an application.
Thank you, Jeff. Jake, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, and just to give you a little comfort there, because of the way the statute is constructed, we could not grant or recognize you until you'd taken those steps. This just allows them to start the process, even if they haven't fully completed the statutory requirements. However, we could never grant or recognize an accreditor who had not done the 3 things that you outlined.
Brief follow-up, Michael, before I move on.
Very brief. Having gone through the recognition process many times, I wouldn't want the department also to be spinning its wheels because it couldn't evaluate an agency that hasn't yet established standards, processes, and procedures to do the very work that it's seeking to gain recognition by the secretary. So, doing that, at least the front end work of establishing standards, policies, and procedures can allow the staff to start processing an application.
Thank you. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thank you. So paragraph 1 in 602.12, the bottom of that paragraph, which is at the top of page 20, says for the purposes of demonstrating experience under this part, accrediting agencies may include one or more of the following. I'd really like to see that say must include the following, because it seems like this is an optional area where accreditors could submit 1 or 2 of these things, or doesn't have to submit any, and doesn't have to prove their experience in accrediting schools. Additionally, maybe for new accreditors that enter the space, I think that's the goal, is wanting to get new accreditors in the space, see some sort of limit on how many accreditors, or excuse me, how many institutions they can accredit within the first several years of being recognized. So maybe limit that to 10 institutions that they can accredit within the first 5 years. And then after that, they've sort of proven some experience, because without demonstrating all that experience, it puts students at risk to enter into programs or colleges that fail to deliver those strong outcomes that the undersecretary and others from the department have really put out there today.
It's an interesting concept. I'm not sure we have the statutory authority to do something like that. And if you think we do, if you can point to something, we would definitely look at it. But my understanding what you're proposing is to put some type of a initial limitation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And if there isn't statutory authority from the department to do that, then I would suggest reversing this and placing that 2-year benchmark back in place.
Jake, did you have something?
Yeah, responding to the other part of what you said, I think if we change that may to a must, it defeats the purpose of this completely. The logic is that we want them to be able to submit their applications prior to having completed all of these steps, so long as they've done something to prove that it's proof of life. It's not, you're allowing them to be born, so to speak, before they can have to prove that they can walk. And this gets them in the door. It lets us start working on the process and working with them. And it also allows us to interface with them a little bit and kind of guide them along in the process. But if we put it as must, it fundamentally undoes the purpose of this. I understand the point about it. It would demonstrate experience, but it does that at the cost of speed. It does that at the cost of, us being involved in the process. And it would massively slow this down and actually probably would exceed the requirements placed in statute at that point.
Require, I'm not sure how many, I haven't counted how many things that they may provide. Is there a way to say, they must require at least 3 of the following? That way there's some kind of accountability before. So I'm thinking about this, the metaphor you used was like allowing them to be born, but you're not going to put a baby in the driver's seat of a car right away. So in thinking about baby steps and allowing, and that's why I brought up the limiting the amount of institutions they can accredit within the first 5 years, that sort of thing. Thinking about ways to ease new accreditors into the system, as opposed to saying, here are the keys to the kingdom, have at it, without any history of statesmanship behind them.
I welcome a final thought from the department, and then if Magnus, you have more, I'll put you back in the queue and I'll move on. Please, Jake.
Yeah, I mean, there already is that gating issue. Gating, system. They can't actually be recognized until they meet the statutory requirements. 3 of those things are statutory requirements. So this gets them in the door for the application process, but it does not get them recognized automatically. It won't be until they, meet the 3 statutory requirements, which are, again, included within that and their implementation and regulation. So I think we already have that protection built in here. This is, again, just a way to get them into the application process.
Thank you all. Okay, Rebecca, I'm going to you, and then Mike, I'm coming down to you, please.
Thank you. So I'm looking at section A, Romanet 2(1). Does this require separate incorporation for all programmatic agencies?
Can you repeat the reference?
It's section A, Romanet 2(1). Were you talking about incorporation for the programmatics?
19.
19. For new agencies, or does this also apply to existing programmatics?
Yeah, so let me just make sure we're looking at it in context. So this is for creating experience. And what we're doing, so this gets at when is an agency an agency? And so the act of incorporation, I mean, I think, as far as I know, all agencies are incorporated in some form or fashion. And so this allows the process of incorporation to be a starting point.
Thank you, Jeff. Follow up, Rebecca.
Yeah, I'm curious, Jeff, like is the way to reference the statute here as it relates to the incorporation and separate incorporation?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Like where in statute does it say that programmatic agencies have to be separately incorporated?
Separately incorporated from what? From the
said separately incorporated.
Yeah.
This is under section A, Romanet 2(2), but it still requires separate incorporation.
It doesn't require separate incorporation, it requires incorporation. And again, it's keying off of the time that the agency is incorporated to operate in whatever jurisdiction it's located in. So again, it's getting at this concept of when is an accredited agency born, so that you can take a look. And so we're going back to the establishment of the incorporation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Mike, you have the floor.
Thank you. I just want to take a moment to congratulate the department and thank them for this work. I think one of the, earlier on we were talking about, people not moving between accreditors. And I think part of that is because people have a choice between moving to one of the 6 regional accreditors in most states and jurisdictions. And part of that is fueled by the absence of institutions that are responsive to the interest of R1 and other kinds of institutions where the accreditation process can actually do much more to strengthen the quality of programs. And so what I'm looking at here, and I just kind of want to re-emphasize this, is, this accelerates the application process. It doesn't change the approval standards. Institutions still have to meet all those standards. They still have to accredit institutions before they can be approved. They still have to jump through all of those hurdles. All this does is take a clock that in the past has become an infinite loop of waiting before you can even complete the application and say, we're going to start the clock when you tell us you want to start it, understanding you still have to do all those other things. This opens the door. If you think about the considerable investment of literally millions of dollars a year that goes into creating a new accreditor, this eliminates kind of the stranglehold that existing accreditors have on the system and opens the door to develop new institutions that can help our higher education institutions be even better. So I just want to make that point that this is really important to opening the door to innovation, especially in this accreditation space.
Thank you, Mike. Jeff, please.
Thank you, Mike, for stepping back and looking at the big picture. Sometimes when we get focused in on the little elements of it, we do lose track. But that's exactly what this is for. And again, we are trying to move up that process because too many institutions are as you say, they're frozen out before they can even submit their application.
Thank you. Jennifer, you have the floor.
So, I can wrap my head around the 2-year getting rid of, and I understand exactly now. I'm more with the program than I was a few minutes ago. But I am very much with the program. I will want to, though, and I'm not sure it's in this section, but I do second Magnus. I understand the statutory constraints. I feel like it is very important when we open the door to new accreditors, which I think is really great, that we have eyes on them more quickly than we have eyes on established accreditors. And so during the NASIKI process, and maybe it will end up just being organic, although I would prefer for something to be required, that they not receive full recognition. They'll receive full recognition. Sorry, let me back that up. They will be recognized, but that their term of recognition is shorter than the full term, which might be a way of dealing with any statutory issue. I just feel like it's super important. I do not support something that Magnus said about limiting the number of institutions that they accredit outside the gate. We have definitely seen, I've recently learned what too small looks like. And so I support, this is a peer review process. It cannot be a peer review of 2 institutions or even 5 institutions. It needs to be something more than that. So we need for a new accreditor to be sort of sought after by institutions. But we also need eyes on that as that is happening. So I think we do, in the course of this conversation the next 2 weeks, need to figure out what those eyes look like.
Thank you, Jennifer. Jeff?
Yeah, I had my placard up, but you got to the point that I was going to ask you, which was, would a shorter term suffice? And you basically have confirmed that. So that's something that we will take back. I can't at this point determine whether or not that's something we put in the language or that's something that that we talk about as a matter of policy. But I think we can work with something like that.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeff. I have 3 cards remaining. I'm inclined to suggest that we move to our afternoon break as soon as we call on these 3. Magnus, you have the floor next.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate additional context provided by the department, but I think underlying my concern is that a new accreditor will gain recognition and then expand very rapidly without adequate eyes on them. So in paragraphs 2 and 3, I don't necessarily want to read them all out if I don't have to, but I have some questions about what those sections mean to the department in terms of in practice for an agency seeking recognition. What sort of timeline exists there? Or is there any ways that you can ensure or guard against bad actors falling through the cracks? And does it essentially say that an agency can be recognized for just a few days after accrediting schools? It can be recognized after while having just for a few days accrediting institutions. Having trouble putting that sentence together. Sorry.
Thank you, Magnus.
Your question was in reference to A2 and 3, just to confirm?
Yeah, on page 21, paragraph 2 and 3. Mm-hmm.
And just let me try to understand that. So the question is, I mean, can you repeat the question that you're looking for on these 2?
Yeah, can you envision what this looks like for the department, and how are you ensuring that bad actors don't fall through the cracks and gain recognition and then expand pretty rapidly?
I don't see, I mean, when you look at this, I don't think this adds additional risk. I mean, you're not granting accreditation. You're talking about the beginning of the process. Yeah, and actually, that's a good point. Beth's going to maybe explain the process a little bit to you, so you understand when they actually become a recognized accreditor.
So, this would still, an agency would still have to go through the entire process, which would mean that they would have to first submit a petition, but it's only part of it. They have to first submit demonstration that they meet the basic eligibility requirements. That's not changing. So that's section 602 through 602.15. Once my staff were to look at that and determine that an agency were to meet 602.10 to 15, then the agency could submit the rest of the full petition, which is 602.16 through 28. And we would then look at making sure that the agency meets all of those requirements. That includes, you'll notice later on, foreshadowing, we are making some changes to the process, but we are still requiring observation by department staff, which is required by statute. So we would be going on site to observing at least one type of agency activity. We would also be looking at that documentation, and we look at as much documentation is available for an initial agency. It's limited. There are not as many. So usually we're looking at everything that they have. And we're going to be looking at as much as possible. And they are required, any agency is required to meet all of those sections before they could gain recognition, because as staff, we could not put forward to NASIKI. We put forward, department staff puts forward a recommendation based on the review of regulations, and NASIKI puts forward a recommendation to the senior department official. We can't put forward a recommendation to grant recognition if not all of those sections are met. So even if this is now allowing an agency to go through the process without having granted accreditation or pre-accreditation, there would still be a lot that is being reviewed by this agency in order to determine that they would meet regulatory and statutory requirements.
Yeah, and as a practical matter, we wouldn't even put it on the agenda before NASIKI, before they had reached that stage.
Thank you, Beth. Jeff, Ed Magnus, Michael, I'm coming over to you.
Yeah, I just want to quickly reiterate, because maybe it was missed. I was recommending, and the department said it would take it back, that in this particular area, they would still potentially consider having, requiring standards or procedures and process before they can move forward with an application, and then have that play itself out. So I was trying to strike a balance there between the two things and giving the staff the opportunity to meaningfully evaluate an agency, even though it hasn't yet granted or denied accreditation. So the other thing I wanted to just go back there. You have an expectation that states may submit an application to be an agency as well. In your experience, would a state agency meet the expectation of incorporated to operate? And I think, getting to this idea, is that a separate incorporation? Is that something that is the agency itself is incorporated? Or would you consider that to be under the umbrella of a larger incorporation of which that agency is a part of? I just flag it because I know that you are looking for the allowance for states to go through that, and a state agency may not meet the definition of incorporated to operate in the jurisdiction. I don't know necessarily the legal parameters for that, but I know that in some of the states where we accredit public institutions, the agency itself, that had preceded, was not necessarily incorporated separately in the state.
That's one, Mike, that I'm not sure the current language covers. So that we would, I think we would take that back. And again, I think conceptually, it's, when was the agency born? So that could be it was created by state legislation, or somehow organized. But we'll make sure that we have that right, because you're right there. That is a scenario that is possible.
Jake? Apologies,
Yeah,
Michael. Jake, did you want to add before I turn it back over to
think-
Michael?
Right now, where we use the language about, incorporation in this section, it really just means legally exist. However, yeah, I think we do need to take that back and look at it a little bit more closely to make sure we're capturing all the scenarios we want to.
That's what I was going to get to, is that I think the word incorporated has a particular kind of meaning, and what you're trying to get to is legally authorized, legally established in the jurisdiction.
Thank you, Michael. Sarah, I'm coming over to you.
I just want to thank again the department for the important work and careful work. And I want to echo one thing that Ray Rodriguez said earlier about Florida. As a faculty member in Florida, I got the question, oh, is something wrong? You're changing accreditors. And to which I would say, no, we actually just want to get better. We're not the number one higher education system, and we want to be even more innovative. And I think we are. And then I just want to point out, since we had Corey's excellent presentation earlier, there are really economies of scale and scope, and Jennifer brought that up earlier. We can't just have 5 or 10 institutions. And in fact, if we did, then those numbers wouldn't move at all, because these other accreditors have 150 to 1,400. And if we set numerical caps, that's a structural barrier. And it would be like if you had started a new company, but you were only allowed to have so many customers. And we really want to encourage innovation. And I think that's why we're all here.
Thank you. Department, any final words before I move us into our afternoon break?
No, we appreciate everybody's careful analysis and thoughtful suggestions, and look forward to continuing going through this after the break.
Let's take a break and come back at 10 till, please. Thank you. Welcome back from the break, everyone. We're going to dive back into the text. So Jeff, I'm going to immediately turn it over to you so that you can get us started.
Thank you. Before we moved on, I just want, and I'm hesitant to say this, but I just wanted to make sure that all the questions on 602.12 had been asked that we had.
Going once, going twice. Then I believe we're going to be ready for 602.13. I do see your card, Michael.
I'm going to ask Heather Perfetti to come to the table and for the rest of the afternoon.
Okay. So, Mike, we did want to get back to you just on one item, which Beth reminded me on it, and she didn't want to appear to be Miss Smarty Pants on it, but it comes down on the state agencies. State agencies got phased out, so we don't have a process for any new state agencies because of the statute.
Thank you. And for the record, on behalf of institutional accrediting agencies recognized by the Secretary, I would like to welcome to the table alternate Heather Perfetti. And then David, I see your comment card, please.
Yes, I would like to invite Bill Hathaway to the table.
Okay, then we will do that formal exchange. And for the record there, on behalf of private nonprofit institutions, we're going to welcome alternate William Hathaway to the table. Jeff, while everyone's getting set up here at the main table, I would love to turn it back over to you to get us started with 602.13.
Thank you, Kayla. Yes, we'll go to 602.13, which is on page 24. This is a new section. The addition provides that the requirements that accredited agencies, institutions, and programs are subject to federal and state antitrust laws as directed in EO 14279. And I think actually that is a little bit misleading in that accrediting agencies, whether they're recognized by the department or not, are generally subject to antitrust laws. So that the fact that they're recognized doesn't have bearing on it. But I'll let Jake. Do you have any additional color on antitrust?
No, I think that was a pretty good summary. I think, as has been discussed previously, our job is not to enforce antitrust. Antitrust is the DOJ's prerogative, but everybody is subject to it, including accrediting agencies, as well as any other, commercial organization. Again, our purpose is not to enforce it. We're not stepping into their shoes here, but we do want to acknowledge that it exists and that there are, interest within that field.
Yeah, and to that point, there was a recent statement of interest filed on an accreditation case by the Department of Justice with the AVMA. They weren't opining on the merits of the case. It went just on some of the defenses that the agency was using with regard to immunity from antitrust laws.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jake. Are there any comments or questions on this section 13? Heather, I'd love to invite you to get us started.
Thank you, Kayla. Just a general question. I don't know if it's for Jeff or others, but can you speak more generally about the inclusion of antitrust when there is already an existing body of law and other agencies? I know this is the first reference of 3, so understanding at the highest level the context around the antitrust inclusion in these areas would be helpful.
Yeah, we do have some requirements under the EO to speak to this, and again, because of how some agencies have responded in legal proceedings, we wanted to just clarify that that agencies actually were subject to these laws. So again, doesn't add anything, doesn't subtract anything, but it puts institutions, I mean, puts the entities on record that they are in fact covered.
Yeah, I would add that it's just an extra clarification that, we expect entities, accrediting agencies to comply with state and federal law. This just provides a specific notice of that, there's nothing here that, our recognition of you protects you from any antitrust, laws, as well as we expect you to comply with them to the extent that they apply to you.
Thank you, Jeff and Jake. Heather, did you have any quick follow-up before I move on? Magnus, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you. Can you give an example or two of what kinds of activities would fall under this category? As you said, it's not the department's wheelhouse to enforce antitrust law, but it seems to be this is trying to address something in particular. Are there certain types of activities among accrediting agencies or institutions that you feel necessitates this, aside from the requirements you mentioned from the EOO?
Well, I think if you look at sort of activity in this area, it revolves around restraint of trade, price fixing, those types of things are common with agents, actions taken by nonprofit agencies.
Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Jeff. Jennifer, please.
So I guess I'm going to raise a concern. It's really hard. I'm glad we're going in order, so I'm not suggesting we pivot. But as Heather points out, it's thematic throughout. So it's a little hard to read one section by itself, knowing that there are other sections that relate to this area. And so it's like putting them all together where I have concerns. One of them, and this comes from a place of I support more competition. I've definitely seen some behaviors, especially among the specialized and programmatics, that I find to be barriers to entry for institutions. And so I support conceptually that we need to address those issues. My concern is it feels like when you read it just without having any context or understanding, it feels like a questioning of peer review. And because the concept of sort of a peer review of a bunch of institutions have an accrediting agency, and there's a process where those peers are reviewing that, believe me, we've heard this, as you and I have both heard this for years from members of Congress and others, that that the peer review peer review in and of itself is an issue. And I just want some confirmation, if it's possible, from the department that the purpose of these sections don't relate to a negative view of peer review as a basis for a form, at least, of accreditation. So that was my first question.
So the question is whether peer review in and of itself would run afoul of antitrust law. I mean, the only thing I can, I don't want to say anything absolute because, something that was, if you do illegal activities, within it, right? So, I mean, driving a car in and of itself is not an illegal activity unless you rob a bank while you're driving it. So, but nothing, I mean, nothing on its face. So I'm not trying to be cute on it.
I understand.
But nothing on its face and on that. And again, I think the examples that I provided earlier with regard to the restraint of trade pieces is really what we're more focused on.
Okay.
Jake, do you want to speak on that too?
Yeah, just briefly, I think it's important to point out that peer review is different than collusion. I think, to the point that peer review becomes collusion, that could be an issue, but the purpose or peer review on its own is not problematic there.
Okay. Like I said, there's another section where we'll get to it where this comes up again, which is more specific. I did have one quick question. What is the purpose of C? Does not create a property interest. It's very specifically, I'm asking about the property, or the reference to property interest.
Yeah, that That, so interest here, it's a legal point to some extent. It basically means that if you lose your accreditation, you weren't damaged in a way that you can sue us over. You don't have a monetary claim to, continued accreditation and, the loss of monies that might happen as a result. A property interest is, a fixed legal term in terms of bringing suit and claims for damages.
I feel like it'd be just a thought. I think harm is another word that gets used. So you might want to consider it. It's like, I was like, wait, what property interest? So harm might be something, the word harm might be something to consider in place of, or that's just a thought.
Noted.
Thank you. Heather, I'm going to go back to you.
Thank you. So just for clarification, is there a specific reason for the reference beyond federal and state laws to antitrust specifically here? And then I know there are later sections. And then the second question is you've used collusion, but there's a reference in B to collective action. Are those intended to mean the same things?
Heather, on that one, that's a fine point, and that was drafted by someone who is not here, and we're going to have to get back to you in terms of the specifics on that.
And I'm happy to send some things forward to you as well for consideration.
Appreciate that.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Jeff. Are there any other questions or comments about 602.13 before we move on? Rebecca, please.
Yes, I would like to swap out with my alternate, Brian Kessler. He's very knowledgeable. Thank you.
Okay, so for this next topic, we are going to bring on behalf of Programmatic Accrediting Agencies alternate Brian Kessler to the table. And Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
And again, hesitantly, any other questions on 602.13? Okay, we'll move on to 602.14. These are just conforming changes to our change in the term institution from institution of higher ed. And then just a few cleanup, a clarification down at the bottom of page 25 under Romanet 2 that the link is to all federal programs. They don't have to be federal programs under the Higher Education Act. Okay. We'll take this over to page 27, where we discuss the term separate and independent. And this is a change which we believe helps to, well, this is a series of changes. And when you get into the red text, where we strengthen the regulations to avoid conflicts of interest expectations, and we also clarify and the requirements that there be separateness between an accrediting agency and its joint use of personnel, services, equipment, and facilities with its related trade or membership organization. And I expect we'll probably get a lot of comments on this.
Jennifer, please get us started.
So the waiver language is in the statute, so I'm reluctant to support its removal, but I do support having it be an annual or an every time they're up?
Yeah. Oh,
Go ahead.
I would say the waiver language is permissive. It's not required.
I'll come back on that. I'll come back on that. What I was going to suggest actually is that you just lift from the statute and keep it in, and just have literally the language of the statute in, because by striking it, it looks like you're not consistent with the statute. And so if you just mirror what is in the statute, you're a bit on safer ground. And I personally, again, it's like, I do like having a Nasiki seat at the table. So appreciate that. Yeah, I think it is meaningful to have, it's something that they need to do over and over again when they're up for recognition. So that is something that I would support to have in regulations. I'll stop there. I do have other questions, but I can let other people.
Beth, please.
I just wanted to clarify for Jennifer that actually the statute, as what Jeff said, it does say may. So it is that for any agency that's been recognized by the secretary on or before October 1st of 1991, then the secretary may waive the requirement that such an agency is separate and independent and all these other things. And then also in the regulation currently, we do require agencies that have the waiver that they must apply for the waiver each time they seek recognition.
Yeah. Jennifer, would you like to respond? You have a bit more time on the clock.
I do. So I hear you on the permissive, which is why, and this goes back to something that Jake said earlier about sort of the permissiveness and not regulating the secretary. By striking it, in my view, you create an inconsistency that implies a behavior by the secretary that's inconsistent with the statute. Now, it might be that I guess if somebody comes up before you, before the department, specialized that qualifies for a waiver, comes before you and says, I'd like a waiver, it's not in regulation, they can still ask for it because the statute has allowed for it, but that's not transparent because it's not in regulation. And so I would urge that you can keep it in regulation with the may and with the annual I keep saying annual, with the recognition that has to be done every time they come before, so that again, the secretary each time has the discretion to do whatever they want consistent with the requirements.
Thank you, Jennifer. Department, any response before I move on?
Yeah, we'll definitely take a look at that. I understand your logic on it. Our policy position is that we're generally not in favor of waivers.
Thank you. Heather, I'm going to give you the floor.
Thank you. My question is pertaining to page 27 in number 2. There's a reference to suppliers of higher education services. Can you explain what the issue is relating to that provision and what it's designed to address and who it will affect?
Yeah. So that particular one, it's what we're trying to get here is who is truly outside for purposes of public representation. And so what this is designed to do is to make sure that in-house vendors or vendors for the organization or vendors to the institutional members are not considered to be truly outside for purposes of being public members.
Any follow-up there, Heather?
Do you have specific examples that would help make that clear? I mean, is there some arrangement in mind that's come to the attention of the department as being problematic?
I think it's just general corporate law and board governance that we've been looking at that, but we can maybe provide you with some more specific examples of things which would be sort of inside and not be considered public under this.
Anything final, Heather, before I move on?
If I could just ask, so is the intention to really get at who is by definition a public representative? Is that what it's trying to get at?
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Jeff. Magnus, I had you next. Are you good for the moment?
I'm good. Thank you.
Beth, did you have anything additional to add? No problem. Jennifer? Look at me clearing these cards. Okay. Did you have something, Jennifer? Could you turn your mic on, please?
Yes,
There you go.
Sorry. Yeah, I put my card up in part because I was going to follow on Heather, but I do have in the next section if we're ready to go to 3.
I don't see any more cards. Jeff, did you want to say anything to tee this up before I give it to Jennifer for comment or question?
Sorry, we can go to page 28.
Please, Jennifer.
So I think and I know a lot of other people in the world around us don't understand 3. And so I actually just really wanted to ask what the department intends from this section, then ask questions.
Jake and I are deciding which one of us wants to take it. Take this one. Okay, I'll take it, and Jake can fill in and take a look. Are you ready? Okay. So what this is trying to do is have stricter, clearer definitions as opposed to just guidelines. We want to make sure that we're specifically talking about having controls on these boards against conflicts of interest. Our view was the term guidelines was a little bit too loose. And so we're substituting it with terms like controls and policies. And we also want to clarify what we're looking for in terms of the standards and the policy making body, so that there aren't potential conflicts of interest with regard to who sits on the board and what type of training and restrictions that they're under. And Jake, do you want to add any more color to that?
I think that was a really succinct way of putting that. I don't want to speak too much to merits here, but I think that this does very much mirror, positions that we see taken in corporate law, specifically about board governance and, establishing independence of directors. This essentially just kind of injects that into the accreditation world, specifically the part where it talks about the standards and policymaking bodies. That's very much something that we would typically see or expect to see in, public company type governing documents. So this just provides basically a way to prevent too much capture of the accrediting agency by interested parties.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jake. Jennifer, will you get us started? We have a number of cards up,
Yeah,
please.
I'm sure. So this, and I think I can speak for other folks who I've heard from about this section. I first when I read it, I wasn't quite sure what it was intended to mitigate against. I know a number of people think that it's anti-peer review, and so this is why I was asked the prior question. So this was the provision that I referenced there. So because it's, to me, when I read it, I'm thinking that it could be construed to be read to say that if you're involved in an institution, you can't be involved with the standard setting at the accrediting agency. But of course, the institutions, it's peer review. The institutions are involved in the standards process at an accrediting agency.
Yeah, there's a difference between peer review and standard setting. And so I think the concept around standard setting and policy setting, quite honestly, is you don't want the regulated entities to be making the policy that they are being subjected to. So that's where the distinction. So peer reviews, evaluation, there's a separateness there because you're not reviewing your own institution. You're reviewing a peer institution as part of that review. So, but this gets more at the actual policy making. And the other part, quite frankly, is and it should not come as a surprise to anyone. I think we all see some very cozy relationships between programmatic accreditors and the trade associations that sponsor them or are affiliated with them. In some cases, being in the same building, having the same phone numbers, you have issues with budgets and personnel decisions and things like that. So that's the primary gist of it, is to make sure that there is that separateness, because I think currently under our regulations now, it's a little bit too loose, and you have relationships that are, I know this is an illegal term, but that are overly cozy. So.
Do I?
Very brief feedback, please.
Okay, so I'll get later on to the cozy conversation because we're not there yet. But on 3, I'll just ask, so are you suggesting that accrediting agencies are going to need to have separate standard setting committees or bodies separate and apart from the commission that reviews institutions?
No, the draft, this is dealing with personnel. So the draft regulations are focused on who's on there. And I think we can, sort of look to some recent actions where you had agencies that, there were a handful of schools that were members, and then they all sat on the board, and and you didn't have a lot of outside members. So this is getting at, so to the extent that you need to bring in people outside who are not subject to the requirements, this is what this is really getting to, that you have to bring, that you need to bring in more outside members in order to make these decisions. And I think, as Jake spoke to earlier, this is essentially good corporate governance type of policy.
Please, Jake.
I'd also just add, for clarification, in 3, it says, including by ensuring the members of the standards and policy making body, which may be different than the decision-making body. So that doesn't, we're not dictating that you have to have a separate standards and policy arm. It's just to the extent that an accrediting agency chooses to have one, we would expect that, this is followed in those cases.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer, Jake, and Jeff. Heather, you have the floor.
Thank you. So in terms of the conflict of interest controls, I know that for accrediting agencies, there's no board member that's voting on their own institution, or and then controlling for conflicts of interest for institutions that are in systems and elsewhere. So what is the conflict of interest issue what follows, or is the conflict of interest issue broader than what follows in number 3 on the top of page 28?
Sorry, I think.
Yeah, no, Jake, take this one.
Okay. Can you repeat the question? Because I want to think through this a little bit, because I think there's some nuance here, and I want to make sure I'm getting this correct.
Yeah, and I think that's what Jennifer is sharing, is the nuance has a lot of questions embedded in it. So I appreciate the time that you're wanting to take. So the first language change refers to mandatory conflict of interest controls. So is that one issue in and of itself different from the standards and policy making issue that appears later?
I want to actually take it back for just a second. It's a replacement to the term guidelines. And so what we're looking for here is clear policy, mandatory disclosures, with regard to, when do you have to recuse, when do you have to divest, when you're restricted in your duties. Much more specific. Guidelines is not specific enough. And so this is to, again, try to align it with the state of the art with regard to corporate law.
Jake, please.
And I think I follow the question now. Sorry, I had to read the section a couple of times and hear you say that. But I think we're talking about the standards and policy making body is, as you noted, that people voting on their own institutions have to recuse themselves. To the extent that there's a separate standards and policy making body that is deciding what the mandatory conflict of interest policy looks like, those people need to not be otherwise colored by, the stuff that they're working on. We don't want them to have a conflict of interest while they're establishing the conflict of interest policy that the decision-making body will then use. So it's effectively a double safeguard. You want your standards and policy body to have as clean hands as possible while crafting the conflict of interest policy, so that the people who are then relying on that conflict of interest policy are also operating with clean hands, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Jake. Heather, any quick follow-up before I move on?
So if an agency's board, commission, whatever it's called, is the body that approves of all policy, that would violate this provision.
Why do you think it would violate it?
If it's indicating that those that are creating policy can't be creating policy for themselves, or they can't create standards for themselves if the process or the policy and procedures governing the creation of standards and policy and procedure is to go through a process and feed up to that board that ultimately votes on those, that does or does not align with what is here, that kind of process leading up to the decision makers of a commission.
Yeah, so part of having those controls is to ensure that you don't have those individuals, as Jake says, who don't have necessarily clean hands because they're subject to the requirements that they're doing the standard setting on.
Jake, anything additional before I move on?
I think we should take this one back to just get a full, understanding of how we want to work this. And should I come back with a better explanation for you?
Thank you both. Heather, if you have more, leave up your comment card and I'll circle back. Brian, I'm going to you next.
Thanks for the explanation. And I hate to perseverate over this, but I think Jake, in terms of taking this back, may help us solve some of this. But under the statute, it really prohibits the secretary from restricting the ability of the agency to set within the involvement of its members of the standards of accreditation. So really, what does it mean by the versus between controls versus policies? In this, in particular instances, in something that, I see, this would prohibit any of the faculty deans, presidents to help kind of guide that development of the policies. And it appears to be overly restrictive with limited expertise on that. And I know that we've talked about the conflict of interest, but in terms of that, if these policies are already in place, a lot of these individuals are subject matter experts to that policy. Can you kind of maybe expound upon, a little bit between the difference of control versus policy?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything here that precludes subject matter experts from advising, on particular matters to people who are decision makers, because they're not ultimately making those decisions. And I mean, we see that all the time when agencies put out policies for public input to the membership. So I don't think there's anything there to preclude it. But again, what we're focused on here is who's actually making the decisions and the detachment they have from them, from the subject matter of those decisions.
Brian, did you have any follow-up?
No, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Jeff. Magnus, you have the floor.
Yeah. So I think I'm still a little bit confused on paragraph 3 here. Does it apply to the policy making and decision making bodies? And so if you could a little bit more explicitly state what employees, administrators, directors of schools can't do.
Okay, so you have to start sort of with what we have currently, and what we have currently is discussing the decision-making bodies. But when we're in the new language, we are extending the conflict of interest to the standards and policy-making body, as well as the decision-making body, which we acknowledge may be different.
Any follow-up, Magnus?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Monty next, and then Heather, I'll be back over to you.
Thank you. Just a very quick question, I believe, and that is voluntary membership. The notion of voluntary membership has gotten a bit clouded, particularly as legislators and others weigh in into this arena. I wonder if you can give us some sense of what your definition of voluntary membership is.
I'm gonna pass on that one. I'm with thinking voluntary membership. Actually, you're voluntarily subjecting yourself to accreditation, and then once you become accredited, you become a member. That's sort of what we're looking at in this context. But beyond that, I am not an expert on nonprofit and corporate law, so I'll stay within my lane on that.
Monty, any follow-up? Okay, thank you. Heather, I'm back over to you.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. We'll follow up around some of the concepts. I think my question, though, is related to some of the programmatic concerns you expressed. Would there be an effort to try to bifurcate how this would read for programmatic accreditors versus institutional accreditors if you're seeing that the issues are slightly different?
Well, if I recall, separate independent only applies to the programmatics. And so there's that set of issues. And with regard to some of the controls, I'm not sure we really have a basis for making a distinction between the two. That's a different set of issues with regard to governance and having having controls over conflicts of interest.
Thank you, Jeff. Follow-up, Heather?
Yeah, I think I would just want to add, because I know you referenced personnel involvement and things of that nature. For many agencies, most of them, their standards, their policy setting is guided by regulation, guided by their own policies and procedures, going out for public comment, collecting information, and then taking that through a process, going up to the ultimate decision makers of a commission, and that's who votes on adopting those. But it's after a pretty significant and lengthy process, which I think is why there's so many questions around number 3.
Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Yeah, and just honing in, it's actually a good follow on to Heather. So it's easy, it's relatively easy to think about conflicts of interest in decision-making activities on accreditation when you have a commission of mostly, or at least a good chunk, being the institutions. If an institution's program is up for consideration, of course, they recuse themselves, and that's very straightforward. I think what I'm landing on is that as it relates to the policymaking piece, that affects all institutions in the accrediting body. I mean, you're setting the standards, and maybe it's not standards, it's policies, whatever. So you can't all recuse yourself. And so, but then you're also limiting who the non-institution members can be, because they can't be vendors, which by the way, I'm fully supportive. I wish the statute didn't say 1 out of 7. So I would love for that to be differently worded in statute. So I just feel like this piece, I would encourage the department when it takes 3 back to think about what conflict of interest looks like as it relates to decision-making bodies. And then as it relates to the policy-making process, as Heather said, I don't know an agency that doesn't have a far-reaching process where it seeks comments from everybody. I don't see a world in which the commission, I'm not even going to call it the decision-making body, the commission or whatever they call themselves as the ultimate body, isn't involved in the policymaking. We want them to be involved in the policymaking process. And so I don't want them to be conflicted out in the policymaking process, because when it comes time for them to actually have to make decisions on the institutions they accredit, I want them to be the best subject matter experts. And if they've stepped away from the policymaking process, they're the least familiar people. So I would encourage perhaps the department to think about not even putting in the policymaking piece. And this comes from a place of somebody who absolutely wants to dig into the sort of conflicts of interest and the separate and independent piece.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'll turn it back over to you, Jeff. In the department, we've worked our way through the comments and questions.
All right. Is that all of the comments on 60214?
No, it's not. We're going to continue working our way through.
Okay. Just let me know where you are, Heather, and we'll catch up with you. Same thing.
Okay. Bill, let us know where you would like everyone to look, and you have the floor.
Thank you. I think my comments really start with number 4 here and move through the next few items where there's changes. Let me just say, since I'm just coming up to address this matter, in general, I'm supportive of the concern to have protections against sort of a guild mentality that sort of corrupts the process here and puts students and programs at risk. So as a representative of private independent colleges, this week I was talking to a president that's in our constituency who expressed a kind of horror story about their experience with an accreditor on just this point. So certainly I am concerned about that. I'm glad you're taking it seriously. However, I've also worked a number of years in both an accreditation space and in my field of psychology, and I've been on the state board that regulates that practice in my state a number of times. And so I know these issues are quite complex, and I think some of the points that we've spoken to already have talked about the importance of having subject matter experts on those fields. I also think from a private institution standpoint, when we require an accrediting entity to be completely separate as a separately incorporated entity, that will likely drive up costs for those that have these sort of commingling relationships. And I'm concerned about that as a representative of a private school, as a consumer of a number of programmatic accreditations. So I think it really depends on the details here. And number 4 and number 5, I could actually be fine with this language if we understood it a certain way. But if we understand held separately with the finances in number 4, or the agency's dues determined without any review by the related professional association to mean a separate bank account, they don't do anything with it, their accountants don't look at it and give advice. If we mean that in the professional association side of things, that's going to start taking us down a path that I think will drive cost up. I'm not saying it's an impossible thing to do, but I'm not sure when we look at the presentation we had this morning about the number of accreditors, how feasible it is to do that anytime soon without really blowing up the industry. In professional licensure regulation, the same issue exists, this kind of thing of who sets policies and regulations for a state or a commonwealth, and what is the role of a professional association with that. There was a case in 2015 in North Carolina involving the Board of Dental Examiners and the Federal Trade Commission that addressed just this point and pointed out that a regulatory board in a state is not immune from state action antitrust situations if the professional influence on the board leads them to make decisions that are not explicitly stated in code. And that's what happened in the particular case driving that. So they have to also work through conflicts of interest standards and keep sort of those watertight compartments, but yet the boards are going to be majority represented by members of the profession in those regulation situations. I don't think it's that unique of a situation than what government faces in the other parts of the regulatory triad. So I'm just concerned about what we're trying to achieve here, given that we have a number of accreditors that have navigated this space. And is there a way we can do it without requiring a separate legal status for these, if I'm reading this right, that's where we're heading, for these programmatic accreditors?
Time, I'm going to ask the department and then I can circle back to you if there's more. Any initial response?
Yeah, so Bill, I mean, we would be interested if you think that there are agencies out there that have looked at this carefully with their legal counsel and believe that they're buttoned up with regard to the state of the art that's out there. We would be interested in taking a look at what those policies look like, because our intent is not to drive up costs, but we do have to do a balancing of interests here. So we're open to other to folks who think that they've gotten it right, and think that they're in compliance, and that they've taken the necessary steps to put in controls to get at some of the issues that we're trying to deal. So more than happy to take a look at that if you know of any, and that could be either associations or even institutions that think they have it right.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Jeff. Heather, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I was looking at number 7 on page 29, and I think most of my question focuses somewhere along the same vein of the last question. If we're interested in trying to control increase in costs, why does resource sharing take such a prominent position here? There are certainly ways for agencies and associations to resource share in a way that's productive and effective and without offense. And so could you just talk a little bit more about why this seems to be so prominent, especially the piece about office space? There are agencies that share office space with the goal of reducing their expenses. So, and that obviously has a trickle-down effect to the institutions as well.
So we're not against resource sharing per se. If you want to resource share with, Subway or some corporate organization, more power to you. I think where it becomes problematic is when you resource share, and it can potentially result in control of one organization over the other because one organization owns the resources or controls the resources that you're sharing. That's where it becomes more problematic, and it could be with budget, it could be with personnel, and indeed it could be with buildings, and that's where I think it becomes problematic, and that's where we've actually seen instances where it's like there's not a lot of daylight between the trade association and the accreditor, and they're in the same building, and they're sharing people, and they're a department of the trade association, and it's pretty clear that the trade association is exerting some control over the accreditor's activities.
Thank you, Jeff. Jake, please.
Yeah, I think Bill hit the nail on the head when he used the term guild type regulation earlier. We're trying to prevent that. We don't like all of this goes back to trying to make sure that there is some daylight between the professional associations and the accreditors. And also, earlier we were talking about the concept of a race to the bottom, ensuring that we don't have a guild type system that basically allows people to, one, exclude other organizations unfairly from competition, but also to, prevent them from dropping the standards for their own schools to the detriment of students institutions and otherwise. So this is really trying to make sure that the people involved with running these schools are disinterested and are really working in the best interest of students and institutions, not in, favor of a trade organization or vendor or anyone else.
Thank you. Heather, do you have any quick follow-up before I move on?
Yeah, I would just raise that there's probably a way to control for that in the paragraph that may be missing then, if that's the true intention. It seems to be suggesting that separate office spaces will be mandatory in the language in that last sentence.
Any comment? Otherwise, I'll move on.
Excuse me, you're referring to 7, right?
7 in the last sentence, the requirement in this paragraph for separate office space will take effect 1 year after the effective date
Yeah.
of this.
As this is written and presented, that is actually the intent, is to have separate space from a related organization.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on now to Siri. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. I'm a corporate governance scholar, so I really like Jennifer, the idea of truly separate and truly independent. The first point I just want to raise is we don't know the cost, right? Because it's a little bit bundled with the trade association membership. We don't understand which costs go where. We know that we're cross-subsidizing, and this will create true transparency. And visibility and attribution. I'm really excited about that. And then was anticipating some questions about this. So I did some research on other groups that have done this. And I'm familiar, of course, with financial auditing, but also securities rating, also environmental certification, healthcare quality oversight, and organic agriculture. All of these industries had this sort of issue and work through it. And we could say in retrospect that this was pretty good. I realize it's tough for people because it's always been this way. And sometimes at university meetings, when people say that I pull the plastic dinosaurs off my desk and I play with them, because it doesn't have to be that way. And I think this is exciting. And thanks for the language on this.
Thank you, Siri. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Well, since my name was mentioned, I just want to be clear on one thing. I really support the separate and independent. I actually am somewhat agnostic and maybe even a little sympathetic on the office space one. I'm much more interested in the personnel because I have seen a lot of shared personnel. I'm much more interested in the mechanics and the processes separation, the physical space. I understand the budgetary constraints. And so as long as and I know it's in current regs, Beth can, I'm sure, provide the site, but there's a fair market value rent requirement currently. And so that needs to be demonstrated under current regulations. And so I actually feel like the space piece, I saw it and I kind of and I knew Siri because of Nasiki, you had mentioned office space there. So, but I personally, because you mentioned my name, I just want to make sure that it's clear for the record that the office space piece, I'm fairly agnostic and maybe even sympathetic. I did have my tent up because of 11 on the complaint processes. I always support having complaint processes. So I like 11. I actually also, though, might recommend, because I always find that when you're complaining to the entity itself, what happens to the complaint is always sort of a question mark. So I think the department has complaint processes for individuals or institutions or interested parties to complain to it. And so on this one, on separate and independence, I actually would prefer, or at least add, that they can submit complaints to the department.
Fair enough. We'll take a look.
Thank you, Jennifer. Heather, I'm back over to you.
So going back to item 10, which is on page 30, can you talk about, throughout the proposal, there are a number of different references to training. Can you talk about what kind of training the department might be thinking about providing versus the agency also providing training? Is that something that the department is considering? Because I don't think agencies get much training from the department, but is that a piece of this as well?
We think this is more within the realm of how you do business and general business law.
Any follow-up, Heather?
And then just hopping over to 11 with Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about the anonymous piece that's in 11 and how you would envision that being managed with agencies?
Yeah, I think Jennifer brought a good point in terms of the source. So that's something that we're going to take a look at. If we end up landing back with the agencies, I think we can provide more of a look at what that would look like. But I think Jennifer made a pretty compelling case for it might be better going to another source other than the agency.
Thank you, Jeff. Heather, a little bit more time left. Any final follow-up before I move along?
Are you moving out of this section or?
No, ma'am, just to other cards.
You can go to other cards. I'll come back to a different section.
I will circle back to you. Bill, I had you next in the queue.
So just a clarification question. So when we talk about the personnel, this kind of firewall we're wanting to be enforced here. If someone is hosted by a trade association and they provide housekeeping or IT support, but they're not the commission, they're not the staff that handles the commission's business otherwise, would you see that as within the scope of that, or are you just thinking of the formal commission activities proper?
I think it would depend on the scope of the activities, but that's something we can certainly talk to. I think, again, the concern here is, I think, as I expressed to Heather in the beginning, is over control, and the ability to use resources to exert control over another organization. So if it's, someone that's just going through and emptying the trash cans at the end of the day, I'm not sure how much leverage that puts over the other organization.
Any follow-up there, Bill? Okay, thank you. Brian, please.
Going back to page 29, section 8, starts out, the agency has sufficient controls. What is the definition of sufficient controls?
Yeah, sufficient controls here, I think, means a functional conflict of interest policy. Again, that mandatory conflict of interest policy, and something that actually makes it meaningful. This kind of goes to the training as well, right? It's not just a piece of paper that lives in the office. It's that staff actually know what the conflict of interest rules are, that there is a reporting mechanism for when people think that they're violated. Anything that allows them to, I think, just give some kind of feedback and actually make sure that this has some stick to it. And it's not just, again, a piece of paper in the office.
Any follow-up there, Brian?
No, thank you.
Heather, I'm pleased to be back to you, please.
So looking at number 12 on page 30, with the chief executive of the agency needing to sign a statement certifying these various provisions. Can you talk a little bit about why you see that as necessary, which would be different and separate from the recognition process for the agency?
Yeah. So this is really just getting a affirmation from the agency's representative that they are complying with these rules. It's a hook to some extent. We're making the agency actually confirm that they are following these rules. Obviously, we could still look at them, but we want them to actually represent to us that they're doing it, not just again. It forces them to put some skin in the game to some extent. The agency is now making an official representation to the department. It's not just, there's this invisible sword of Damocles that could fall if we find out that you're doing something wrong. It forces them to actually come forward and tell us we are doing the right things.
Any follow-up there, Heather, before I move along?
And what would be the process then if that is done annually? What would be the next step from the department, and in particular requires the reporting of complaints in a certain way in that last sentence? So what do you anticipate the department doing with the agency with that reporting?
We would accept the information and go through it and review it. And if there was any follow-up, we would do that.
Thank you, Beth. Heather, brief remark, and then I want to move along. We are 8 minutes out from our hard stop. I do have a couple of housekeeping pieces. We may not get to all of these cards.
Yeah, I'm happy to follow up with Jeff and others with just some additional clarifiers throughout that tie back to some of what we've already talked about.
Perfect. Thank you. Jeffrey, please.
In going back to number 12, it's actually at the top of page 31. I'm not sure if this is a typo or if this maybe I'm misreading it, but it says that any complaint received under paragraph 10 in the past year, but the complaint seems to be in paragraph 11, unless I'm completely missing something.
Beth?
No, I think that's right. It should say 11 instead of 10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you, Beth. Mark, you have the floor.
So just really quickly, a lot of this seems to be around compliance with best practices and conflict of interest, et cetera. And so, I've served on a lot of not-for-profit boards, and every year you sign, this is our policy, and you sign it, and then with the entity has that is what it has is its compliance. Just that the CEO has for every member of the organization, every member of the board, that they have reviewed the document and signed it for that year. Are you looking for anything more complicated or onerous than that?
No.
Any follow-up there, Mark, before I move along? Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Jeff. Magnus, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'm looking at paragraph 13 on page 31. This is a really long paragraph. Talk about commas. That first sentence is about half the page, but in that first sentence, closer to the bottom half of the page, after a comma, it says, based on clear and convincing evidence in the administrative record. Can the department tell us what they mean by clear and convincing evidence? Give us some examples of that. And of course, I'll give you a moment or two to digest that paragraph.
So clear and convincing evidence in the administrative records. When we're talking about the administrative record, we're talking about the record on which the decision was made, all the facts and circumstances that were included within that. Clear and convincing evidence is a standard of proof that is used. It's a term of art that's used within courts. There's different standards for determining guilt or liability, right? Clear and convincing evidence means that it's highly probable that something was done. So in that case, based on all of the factors in the administrative record, that it's highly probable that it took some action in violation of the foregoing paragraph or sentence.
Any follow-up, Magnus?
Yeah, I think in this case, it would be helpful to lay out like some specific examples of what that clear and convincing evidence would be in this case, maybe in preamble language, or even added into the paragraph itself, like things like such as X and Y, Z, but not limited to XYZ? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, I think we could probably look at adding some clarification either here or in the preamble. I think we want to be careful with that. When we say clear and convincing evidence of the administrative record, that is a broad term that basically allows us to look at all the factors that were used in a given situation. We don't necessarily know what that evidence will look like in every case, right? So we want to be careful that, we don't regulate ourselves into a corner or basically create something that really constrains what we can and can't look at. So we could probably look at some examples in the preamble, but I think we want to be careful about putting too much in here that might be seen as limiting.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you, Magnus. Thank you, Jake. Mark, did you have something else? Jennifer, you have the floor and you'll be the last card before our closing.
I just think in that same paragraph, you might want to think if you're looking at, first of all, it might be structurally good to break it out, but into subsections. But in doing so, there are places where, and I won't belabor it, but it says like increase or decrease. I think it should say increase or decrease at every time you mention it, because you can screw up. I mean, agencies can screw up by going either direction.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. We're down to 3 minutes. I have a housekeeping announcement, but before I do, department, is there anything that you wanted to say in closing of today's session and to set up the start of tomorrow?
Just again, thanks for everyone. I know this is a little bit of a slug, slough through the regs, but I think identifying these issues early gives us a chance to start working on them. Tomorrow we will resume back where we are. We'll continue. We'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. There's another section which I think we're going to get a lot of comments on coming up shortly. But once we get beyond that, I think it'll go a little bit faster. And then again, I think once we do that, we can go put a pin in some of the ones that we know people have major issues with, and then we can put some of these other issues that are less contentious aside and put a pin in them. So thank you.
Thank you. I would like to remind everyone to closely monitor emails this evening as things may be shared out. I would also encourage you to informally share your email addresses with each other if you have not already done so, that you can communicate with each other outside of this space. And I would also like to let you know that tomorrow morning there will be a different Wi-Fi password. So there will be new sheets for you to utilize that new password at the start of tomorrow with. We will start right at 9 a.m. Thank you for a wonderful first day.